Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our next guest speaker tonight, Maria Birger. Maria is Senior Programme Officer at the Heinrich Böll Foundation, Berlin, and is a historian and literary scholar. Maria's talk tonight, Heinrich Böll's Search for a Livable Language in a Livable Country, will focus on the connection between Heinrich Böll's concept of the aesthetics of humanity and his travels to Soviet Russia and his support of dissidents there. You're very welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm quite nervous because normally I can start with a quote from Heinrich Böll in German like that, and in English I can't. So I try my best to bring along my message and not quoting Heinrich Böll because all the quotes are circling in my head right now. I'm delighted to be here, and while preparing my first trip to Ireland, I picked up Heinrich Böll's Irish journal once again. I wasn't looking for any travel-related suggestions, as I have always read this journal as a beautifully composed work of art. The Irish Journal is an aesthetic space that Böll created, and it contains reflections on Ireland and some reflections on Germany too. For example, in the chapter with the political dentist. And this time, I was reading it and I stumbled across another reflection of Russia. That was new to me. I read the journal many times, and now that. It appears in chapter 2, Arrival 2, where the narrator buys a book by a 19th century writer called Goncharov. More precisely, it's one of his most famous works, Oblomov. This is a well-hidden hint referring to Heinrich Böll's contemplation on meritocracy. Sorry, I'm going back. Sorry for that. Perfect. Now we're in there. However, it could also be interpreted as a reference to Heinrich Böll's knowledge of Russia in the 1950s, which is the focus of my talk today. Russia was just one of the countries that Heinrich Böll visited abroad. However, like Ireland, it was a place he visited several times, both alone and with his family, and it was important to him because of the people he met there. Heinrich Böll's knowledge of Russia in the 1950s was straightforward because of the Second World War. Before the Second World War, he read a lot of Russian authors, mostly from the 19th century. During the Second World War, he served at the front lines in Ukraine. After the war, visiting Russia, Stalinist Russia, one must say, was not his first priority, of course. Consequently, his understanding of Soviet Russia was rather vague. It was based, on the one hand, on the literature he was reflecting on, reading a lot, and on the other hand, he was writing in his letters from the war about scary and intimidating vastness of the country, a country without any fences. There are many aspects of that part of his reflection on Russia, his thinking about Russia and Soviet Russia. However, I'm going to focus today on his network, which was crucial for his understanding of the Soviet state. The first time Heinrich Böll went to Moscow was in 1962. It was part of an official cultural exchange with two of his colleagues. By then, Heinrich Böll was a well-known writer in the Soviet Union. His first works were translated even under Stalin in 1952. Of course, censorship was hard and it was difficult, but something triggered the readers, and they wanted to know more about this author. So a lot of his literal work was translated, not so much his essays. And so Heinrich Böll's first visit to Moscow was in '62 during a period which was overall liberalization in culture and politics. Stalin, the dictator, was dead, and under Khrushchev, the cultural life began to flourish more or less, with some difficulties, but still it was possible to invite a West German author to Moscow to connect, to talk, and when he arrived in Moscow, he met one person. That guy, who was called Lev Kopelev. Lev Kopelev had a quite interesting biography. He was born in Kiev in 1912, and he was very interested in communism. He was enchanted more or less by communism, by Stalin, and he even took part of the Holodomor. It was the Great Hunger in the 30s. As a young student, he was called to be a propaganda, or to propagate the ideas, or more or less that's what Stalin wanted. And the fact it was taking the corn from the people, from the land, and selling it to provide money for industrialization. This was one part, and he also went to war, and as the same as Heinrich Böll on the side of the Wehrmacht, Lev Kopelev on the side of the Red Army, and he was continuing to be propagating Soviet ideas, communism, Stalinism even. Behind the front lines, he was a major of the propaganda. But there, he was also always thinking that he was fighting not the Germans, but the Nazis. His German language was perfect. He started learning it as a kid, as a child, and he loved German literature. He wrote a PhD on Schiller's work, and so there was quite a difficult aspects of his understanding of Germany, of the fascism, and on the other hand, the big idealism of communism. During the war, he was very upset when he saw that how the Red Army was treating the common German people, and he was standing up for women and for children, and that wasn't agreeable for many of his the soldiers of the Red Army and for the other officers, and they more or less he ended up in the Gulag for 10 years, where he met another writer, later on Nobel Prize laureate Solzhenitsyn. In '56, he returned to Moscow. Moscow was flourishing, was opening up. He started he's researching again, giving lectures. He was starting to read Heinrich Böll without knowing him in person. And then, '62, Heinrich Böll came to Moscow, and of course, Lev Kopelev, he was speaking German, he was translating, he was the first one to greet him. They got to know each other, they were talking a lot, and during the meetings, they also talked a lot about the Second World War. It wasn't that far away at that moment, 62, 45, of course, but not only about that, they started talking about totalitarianism, about Stalinism. By then, Lev Kopelev started to think about, as he called, his sins he committed as a believer in communism and even in Stalinism. He started to write his first book of memoirs, and so they were talking about the language, how to write about such horrendous and atrocious systems which were forcing people or enchanting people to do awkward stuff, as one can say, really. And that was very, this was a connection that went. It wasn't only friendship. They started as friends, but it went deeper, because they not only wanted to understand how to reflect on it on a personal level, but also on how one might reflect on these on the regimes of terror in the public space. And after Heinrich Böll returned from Russia, they stayed in touch. Actually, they wrote a lot of letters to each other. Sorry for that. Ah, perfect. Oh no, it's stuck again. Oh, sorry. Next one. Thank you so much. Sorry. So this volume was also published by the Heinrich Böll Foundation, or with the help of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And in the letters, they were, of course, discussing literature, art, but also how to help people and how to understand how to deal with this difficult past under Stalin and under Hitler. And during these letters, they also were starting to talk about projects, about publications. So, for example, Heinrich Böll helped Lev Kopelev publish his memoirs in the West, and he wrote a lot of beautiful essays about these memoirs of Lev Kopelev, where he was talking about how a person went through this through the war, the totalitarian system, and how he was enchanted by it, and how difficult it was to get free of this language and of the ideas which were connected to the language, which were part of this whole concept, and to find a new language which is describing the terror as terror. In 1964, Heinrich Böll gave 4 very important lectures, and they were called the search for the poetics of humanity. And there he was reflecting about the livable language and the livable country. This understanding of how neighborhood and the concept of neighborhood was destroyed by the totalitarian systems, by violence, by a language which was used during in Nazi Germany. He was reflecting on how literature could be created after this terror. And there he was also talking about how important not only friends are, but allies. And allies in the sense that they talk publicly about the terror of the past, and how they're trying to find words to create a livable country, a democratical country, a free country. But while Germany was moving forward in '68 through different stages of liberalization, Soviet Russia collapsed, one may say, the culture again back under Brezhnev to it's not totalitarian, but a very oppressive state where many people were moved away from different positions, like Lev Kopelev, and their names shouldn't be mentioned again in the public space. So they were somehow, they lived in this country, but they had no space, no possibility to earn money, and no possibility to proceed with the ideas of liberalization, of democratization, and so on. So Heinrich Böll became one of the most important connections for many dissidents. And through Lev Kopelev, he learned, he met, for example, there we go. The so-called, we can say, Oppenheimer, the Soviet Oppenheimer, Andrei Sakharov. There we have him in the picture together with Lev Kopelev, and it's signed for Heinrich Böll. And they met in 1975 when Heinrich Böll returned to Moscow, and they were talking about the use of the atomic power for civil, like for energy and so on, and Heinrich Böll was against it, and Andrei Sakharov was still for that, but they respected each other. And Andrei Sakharov was fighting by that time a lot of fights for human rights and helping immigrants in Soviet Russia and people from many parts of the Soviet countries. So that was a network which was spreading, but it was not only in Moscow, it was also in Ukraine with poets and literally people in Ukraine, in Georgia, and in many other countries. Through Lev Kopelev, step by step, Heinrich Böll learned about the Soviet state, the oppression, and he was helping people. And he was helping people not only about like famous people like Sakharov, but he was also helping other people that weren't that famous by that time. For example, there was a Ukrainian poet. He died in the Soviet Gulag in 1985, shortly after Heinrich Böll himself. It was Vasil Stus. Now his legacies recovered. They recovered his legacy, and he's a very important voice for Ukraine. So Heinrich Böll and the whole family, they were helping with sending medicine, writing articles about the friends. They were and the allies actually were thinking about this liberalization and giving them a space in Western Germany. So this was crucial for many people to earn money, to get like their voices heard in another space. There was of course another person. Also Nobel Prize laureate Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a friend of Lev Kopelev. At one point they were together in the Gulag system, and they met, and afterwards Solzhenitsyn wrote about this oppression, the Soviet oppression, and this was very important because he was one of the first voices heard who was talking publicly in this way, in literature, in the literary space about this whole Gulag system which exists until today, unfortunately. When Alexander Solzhenitsyn was kicked out of Soviet Russia, he came to Heinrich Böll, and he stayed there for a couple of days before he moved further on. After Lev Kopelev was kicked out of Soviet Russia, he came to Heinrich Böll. So the help was on so many levels that Heinrich Böll provided. But he also, as I said, opened up the public space for his allies, dissident allies from Russia and West Germany. And this is a picture which was taken during an interview in Moscow in 1979. Shortly after that, Lev Kopelev was kicked out of Moscow together with his wife, and he came to Germany and so became an immigrant with 68 years. But this talk was about why we were shooting at each other during the war. It was a very important talk, and it was covered in the newspapers, and there were a lot of letters written to Lev Kopelev and to Heinrich Böll for Lev Kopelev, letters from people all over the country who saw this interview and said, this is so important that people who were on different parts during the war, that were able to talk to each other again and to explain how they saw each other during the war and after the war. So this whole process of how we can live in this country with these horrors of the past and talk about it, we can find this. They were trying to find this language together more or less. And this was very important, and many were very important for many, many people. So it was translated, this interview, I think it took 3 hours to film this whole thing. They talked along a lot, and it was like 1 hour was on public television, and afterwards some parts of that were also on the radio, so it was repeated several times. But there was not only Solzhenitsyn and Sakharov. The person you see, of course, Annemarie Böll, Heinrich Böll, Lev Kopelev, and there you see, this is my father. So now I'm in the picture too, I'm sorry. My father was a painter. He was born in 1923, yes. He was also, during the war, he was fighting on the side of the Red Army, and he became a dissident in '68 when he was signing letters in protection of friends who were fighting for the liberalization in the Soviet Union, and he was kicked out of the Writers' Union, of the Painters' Union. He was kicked out of the party. He became a party member in Stalingrad, one should say. More or less forced. He was forced to become a party member. Heinrich Böll talked, and when this first exhibition in the West happened, Heinrich Böll was talking in his, and my father wasn't allowed to travel from the Soviet Union, so Heinrich Böll talked about him and talked about the art and the friendship. And this is very important for me personally too. When we came to Germany, René Böll supported us. My father was the second stipend holder of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. So this is where research meets my personal life somehow. And in a way, how one sees the other, how one sees Germany, how one sees Russia, this is very important not to forget that if we are not talking about a difficult past, we can't live in a better future, one might say. And what happened in Russia today, this is I jumped now to an event which took part a couple of days ago in April. There was an organization. This is called Memorial. Memorial, maybe you have heard of it, is working on the Stalinist past in Russia, or was working. They were collecting evidence, sources, so that they can show how difficult this past was and how the terror worked. And under Putin they became unacceptable in Russia. They were kicked out. Many people were of this organization were kicked out. And why is it connected to Heinrich Böll again? Because René Böll was a co-founder of Memorial, together with Andrei Sakharov, whom I mentioned. So it's just very close to Heinrich Böll. Talking about a difficult past, building organizations to provide a better future, and to think about how we can talk to each other. This is very important for this. This was very important for these people personally and for their organizations. So the story somehow continues, and we'll see how it ends. Thank you so much.